Hey, I'm Mark Weathington. I'm director of the J.C. Ralston Arboretum at NC State University. Thank you for joining us. For those who are new, join us every week. We join you live at 3 o'clock every Wednesday, 3 o'clock Eastern time. And if you can't catch us then, you can always see us on YouTube. We've got a great channel with all kinds of gardening and plant-related topics. Subscribe to it. You can to our channel, and you'll be notified when we have new programming if you so choose. So today I'm going to talk about rosemary. You know, we're getting into the holiday season. The big holiday for my family is Thanksgiving. I think we're going to have 15 people joining us at the house this year, making up for lost ground with COVID last year, I guess. My wife and I don't like to go anywhere else for Thanksgiving because, frankly, we think we cook a great Thanksgiving meal. And once recently, when our kitchen was being redone and we couldn't have it, we went to my mother's house and still cooked Thanksgiving. We said, no, allow us, please. No shade on my mother's cooking. It's wonderful. We love our Thanksgiving meal. And rosemary's a big part of that. I love the taste of rosemary. Those who join us often know I'm always saying I don't have much of a sense of smell, but rosemary, boy, I can smell it really well. It's a fascinating plant in terms of history and folklore and uses. A lot of similar plants, you know, this is a Mediterranean species. So there's a lot of history that has been passed down through the generations that we know about, mostly because it's European, and so it gets passed down. A lot of plants all over the world have these great traditions. We just don't always hear about them because they don't come down to us through our kind of Eurocentric vision that we have. But rosemary is one that we know a lot, and it has a lot of uses and a lot of purported uses and that kind of thing. So first, the name Rosemary. Rosmarinus is the Latin name. We'll get to that in a second before anybody jumps in. Rosmarinus, if you break that down, marinus, sea, right? Rose, not like a flower, but R-O-S, rose is dew. So dew of the sea. And as I said, this is a Mediterranean plant, so it grows in these very hot, dry climates. And when rosemary is grown in a very hot, dry climate, it will also often have the oils will kind of appear on the leaves. It'll exude those volatile oils, and it really looks almost like dew on a plant. Now, we're growing it here in Eastern North America where it's not dry and it's very humid, so you don't often get that look unless you're growing it in a really dry spot. I've got some notes, so because there's so much lore and it's blowing around a little bit, so got to remember to keep my rosemary. When I talk about the uses of rosemary, one of them is as a paperweight. So I mentioned the name Rosmarinus. It has traditionally been known in its Latin name all the way back from Linnaeus as Rosmarinus officinalis. When you see officinalis on a name, a plant name, that usually indicates that it has some use, either medicinal or culinary. So a lot of officinalises out there for plants that are very useful. So Rosmarinus officinalis. Even back pretty early on, there was a lot of folks who said, well, this looks a lot like a sage, like a salvia. They're in the same family. They're in the mint family. In the mint family, well, I'll show you a picture of flowers that are a little easier to see in a minute. Mint family has very distinctive flowers. And so, you know, you could see the relationship there. There was some thought that the stigmas were a little bit different, and so they separated it out. But as we learn more about plants and as we learn their evolutionary history and relationships, we've been changing plant names, which frustrates a lot of people. And as I get older and older, it gets more and more difficult to remember. But Rosmarinus officinalis is now Salvia rosmarinus. If you look on our website, you won't see that because we haven't made that change yet, because it hurts to make changes like that to really well-known plants. But it is a change that we should be making. And usually when you change a name, a genus name, you would go from Rosmarinus officinalis to Salvia officinalis. But there's already a Salvia officinalis, which is our culinary sage. So it's Salvia rosmarinus. So going back in history, some of the Christian folklore I think is really interesting. The folklore says that rosemary will continue to grow, get bigger and bigger for 33 years. Now remember, this is coming from a Mediterranean climate where it grows much slower than it does here. It'll grow for 33 years, the lifespan of Jesus, and stop growing at that point, which rosemary, typical rosemary, can grow to about 5 feet tall. So Jesus was not as tall as he sometimes pictured. If you go by this, he was a little shorter than me. And then it won't grow anymore after it gets that tall. Now, it can get to 5 feet pretty quickly with different conditions than the Mediterranean conditions. It's got, the flower color is blue to violet. There's some pink forms and white forms of it, but the species, the wild species, is blue, and the folklore, the Christian folklore there is it got that blue color because when Mary and Joseph were fleeing to Egypt, Mary laid her cloak over rosemary to dry, and so it got those blue flowers. And there were, because of that, you can sometimes find that the meaning behind the name rosmarinus is not dew of the sea. It is a Latinization of Rose of Mary, which was a new one to me. I had never heard that before. And I keep a running list of all the plants that are not roses that the common names have rose in them. So this is one I have to add to that list. So that's some of the folklore from the Christian tradition, but it goes back further than that. It's often pictured with Aphrodite when she was arising from the sea. You see her depicted with Aphrodite and with rosemary, that's kind of thing. But it also, through history and into modern times, has a lot of more purported uses, things. One of a rabbit hole I went down and spent much too long on was a new website for me, Wikipedia. It's not Wikipedia, Wikipedia. There was also a goodwitchessomethingorother.com. So in Wikipedia, there are a lot of magical attributes to rosemary. I won't go through them all because we don't have that much time, but it wards off evil spirits. It attracts fairies, but you also hang it over a crib to keep fairies from stealing an infant. So I don't know if it's like a bug zapper and it attracts them and does something to them, because I would think if you wanted to keep them from stealing your infant, you wouldn't want to attract them to over the crib, but I don't know. Back long ago, and still in some traditions today, it's used in wedding ceremonies. So traditionally, in many places in Europe, it was woven into bridal wreath crowns, and was in some traditions given to wedding guests. I think that may have had more to do with the lack of baby as a strong tradition there. So you get everybody together for a wedding, and you want people to smell a little bit nicer. The Middle Ages, people wore it to protect from the plague and from the evil eye. And couple of male-female things. Now, rosemary, according to, I think, maybe Wikipedia, is a male plant in some way or form. But a man who is indifferent to the fragrance of rosemary is unable to give true love to a woman. Sorry, I'm bumping into my microphone. And a cottage or a house where rosemary is growing well means that the woman of the house wears the pants in the family. So, you got to like, if you're a man, you got to like the smell, but, you don't want to be growing it too well. Sorry, Alexander. Our cameraman is talking about his 5-foot-tall rosemary earlier. Another great website that I often use just to see what people think is one called plantlore.com. If you're putting that in the chat, Chris, it's plant-lore.com. And that collects people's knowledge of lore, so knowledge of what a plant used for. So it isn't kind of a research base. It's like what I grew up with. This is what I learned from my grandparents or whatever, or when I lived in this town, this is what thing. So it's fun. It's fun. So you plant rosemary by the door for luck. That's one person said that, but several things said the best luck is if it's received as a gift. And the converse of that is some people say you should never buy rosemary for yourself. And you smell rosemary to remember things. And there were several people who talked about that. Teachers who would give people rosemary to help them remember. And there is actually some scientific or scientific adjacent, at least evidence that it does stimulate the memory areas of your brain. So there might be something to that. Another thing that comes up over and over and over again, if you look at it, is using it for hair, that it prevents dandruff, it prevents baldness. I wish I had been using it long ago. So their rosemary oil massaged into the scalp. People wash their hair with it. It really is. And that comes up again and again and again. So, you'd like to think that might be something to that. And, kind of like the Wikipedia, it's said to keep away witches, goblins, or even the devil. Although I don't know how it keeps away witches, because apparently witches, according to Wikipedia, use it all the time. So, I don't know. So, like I said, a lot of uses, mentioned some of them, but, another hair. So as a hair rinse, an infusion as a hair rinse will gradually cover gray hair, supposedly. Again, I am not vouching for any of these uses. I'm just saying, adds strength and shine to any hair color. Rosemary oil rubbed into the ends of hair will also help reduce split ends. So many uses. So there are some real active volatile oil compounds in rosemary. The big ones are camphor, cineol, and borneol. And those do have, real effectiveness in some ways. They've got a slight antibacterial properties, so can help with that sort of thing. I would not use it in lieu of other medicines, though, as some sites will talk about. One use that is really well known for rosemary that has been used for a long, long time and is still used is as a very, very effective mouthwash. Um, it says it can get rid of halitosis almost immediately. And so you take a pint of water, heat it up, take it off the heat, steep 3 teaspoons of dried leaves or flowering tops of rosemary for 30 minutes. And then you close it up and keep it in the fridge and, gargle with it every morning. Sounds better than Listerine to me, but yeah, it'd be kind of strong. Other uses that are great, you can take a dried branch and put it in a closet or chest like you would cedar to keep away moths. Again, better than mothballs, at least better smelling. So as a landscape plant, rosemary is pretty easy to grow, provided you give it a couple of things. Excellent drainage. Will not tolerate wet feet. Grow it in just very, very free draining soils, raised beds on slopes, that kind of thing. And well-drained, you do not make a soil well-drained by digging a hole and putting rocks in it. Some people think that's what happens. That just makes a bathtub. No, so you want to have a really, either if you live somewhere sandy, with very sandy soils, or you're going to have to really amend any kind of clay-based soils. They actually like it on the lean side, not super fertile. So, as you're amending your soils for Mediterranean type plants, think more rock garden than, lots of compost and things like that. Some of them you can stretch to maybe, true zone 7s, but really they're zone 7B, zone 8 is where they're really at their happiest. Full sun, if I didn't say that. That's really what they need to survive and grow, especially here in eastern or central North Carolina, where we have lots of rain and high humidity. The other thing they don't like is they don't like organic matter splashing up on the foliage. And a lot of these Mediterranean plants are like that. That's one of the big reasons why lavender is so hard to grow for us. Not the only reason, but one of the reasons. So if under your plant, you mulch with something inorganic, stones, if you're near the coast, oyster shells are great because it actually prefers a higher pH, a more basic soil. But something that won't splash up. And you don't have to mulch a whole bed with that. You can really just do right under the foliage. And as your plant gets bigger, you might need to spread it out. And as leaves fall from the rosemary on there and start covering it up, you need to, either top dress with new stone or whatever, or, rake it out or blow it out or whatever you do. Now, the other thing with rosemary, and I should say, it is a shrub. It is a woody plant. Many of the herbs that we grow are not really woody plants, but these will get trunks on them. I mean, they can get really significant trunks. And the way rosemary typically grows, it'll grow upright and become more and more spreading and kind of arch over. And it will die out at the bottom. Now, we like little green meatballs. I actually like it when it gets kind of bigger and becomes like a little tree, but the wood is very brittle. It'll often break and fall apart. If you want to keep it smaller and tighter and never get up to be a great big tree like that, you have to harvest it regularly. You need to cut it back, shear it back regularly, because once it grows past that stage of having green leaves and it's just bare stems, it is really hard to rejuvenate it. You can do it sometimes, but it's a slow process. You cut it back, you don't go beyond where there are green leaves, you don't go to bare stems, you keep cutting above where there's still green leaves below it, and you keep doing that every year, and hopefully you'll get some more growth coming in there, maybe some more growth from the base. Like I say, and often in situations like this, unless it is a family heirloom, get rid of it and maybe hint around to friends that you want it as a gift, because, if you buy it yourself, it's bad luck. I mentioned flowers are in a range, typically blue-violet, but they can go to pink and white. Flowering time is really weird. Rosemary in true Mediterranean climates can really flower kind of on and off all year round. A lot of sources talk about flowering in cultivation as during spring, but we get flowering all the time. And really, when I think of rosemary's flowering, is really more December, January, during mild winters that you get those flowers in winter, which I really like. Now, you'll see some being sold as upright plants. They are upright when young, but they will kind of spread open, and new branches will keep going up, but the whole appearance will be more of a rounded shrub. There are prostrate ones that are really nice, great for kind of hanging over a wall because they love that dry right there over a wall. And there are some dwarf ones. There are variegated ones. The variegated ones have not been great growers in my experience. But there's a lot of selections out there, and there are some that have been selected for more culinary use, and often they'll have a name like Island Spice or Chef's Choice, barbecue, or whatever. But they're all great for cooking. But there are people who really use them in tinctures and essential oils and things, kind of recognize like 6 different chemotypes that have greater quantities of, camphor than other of these terpenes and active compounds and things. That's something that I don't know a whole lot about. So I'm just saying, repeating something. I don't know much about those, but you can get different ones. And really, if you want to cook with it, the best thing to do is go to a garden center or somewhere and, rub your hand on it and smell it and see what smells the best to you, because that'll generally align with your taste. They are evergreen. Sometimes get asked that, and these leaves are thin. They look like almost like a conifer. So a plant, especially if it's trimmed, it really can look like a little dwarf spruce or fir or short needle pine, which is kind of neat. I love the fragrance of it. It is one of my favorite fragrances in the garden. So I often, at my home, if I have enough sun, which generally doesn't happen or doesn't last for long because I keep planting trees, they get too big. But I love having it by my front door or wherever I go into the house, in and out. So, because just when I walk by, I like to, kind of rub it. It can get you a little sticky, but only in a good way. You can rub it behind your ear, which is a use. It's supposed to give a good impression. So you're supposed to dab some behind your ears for interviews and such. It is, I said you can do a dry sprig in your closet for, to prevent moths, but it can also help prevent some insects or help reduce insects in the garden, whether it's a vegetable garden or a ornamental garden, because rosemary is one of those great plants that can look really good, and so you can grow it with your ornamentals, but it's also an herb, so you can grow it with your edibles. You really don't have to separate those two. Just don't spray toxic chemicals all over the place. And a lot of times people separate their vegetable gardens from their herb gardens, and that's often because their herbs are perennial. They're shrubs or they're plants that come back year after year, and people want to get in with a tiller and till the whole thing up for their vegetable garden. But a lot of herbs, like rosemary, are great for keeping pests out. Some herbs are pretty effective for rodents, so a lot of times people plant a little clipped hedge around their garden to help keep rabbits and mice and things out. But rosemary, one of the pests that it really helps reduce is are bean beetles, which can be a real pest. So I tell people, if you plant herbs as, like I said, a little clipped hedge around your vegetable garden, it helps it look neater and tidier. You can make a really beautiful kind of parterre garden, have a design in there and plant different things in there. And one of the things you should do with a vegetable garden is rotate your crops. So if you have all your areas bordered by rosemary, and now don't let it get 5 feet tall and 8 feet wide, you keep it clipped low. By doing that, you can know, all right, tomatoes were right here last year. I'm going to go with squash in this spot and move things around that way. There are bunches of varieties. We've grown about 20. We don't have that many now. Unless you get them in really well-drained soils, they can be short-lived for us. They just grow too fast. They get to that 5 foot tall, not in 33 years, but in 3 years, maybe 5. But you go to Italy and places and you'll see 150-year-old rosemaries. They can really get old, and you can keep them alive for a long time in the garden. I mentioned drying it. What you want to do is get nice, fresh growth. Don't want to dry the individual leaves, even though that's what you would use for cooking, but you just dry it in bundles. You can hang it upside down somewhere dark, and just let it dry on its own. Another thing, somebody who did a lot of flower arranging with dry flowers and did a lot of herb work told me what she does is she takes whatever she's drying and throws it in an open cardboard box in her trunk. And during the summer, it will dry real quick. And this was in Virginia, but gets real hot real quick. And so that's a great way to use it. Using it, this was kind of started in my head from as I was starting to make Thanksgiving shopping lists. Let me rephrase that. I started thinking about this as my wife made some Thanksgiving shopping lists that I will shop for. So, I wanted to talk about it as a spice. But before I move on to that, I did want to talk about the salvia mint family rosemary connection. You can see some plants in that family like this look very similar, right? This is a lavender. Smells great. You can see foliage-wise looks very similar. Hard to see the flowers on this, but these are a couple of sages, salvias, a shrubby one, Salvia gregii, and one of the herbaceous ones. And if you look real carefully at the flowers, you can see it's got that real typical mint flower with a two-lobed lower lipped petal and a hood petal over it. Doesn't have that radial symmetry like a daisy, but it has very strong bilateral symmetry, so you can fold it in half. Us old people will not like calling this a salvia, but, it is what it is. Science and time wait for no man. Now, I mentioned Salvia officinalis, the culinary sage. You see very different looking, although flowers would be similar. But these make great companions when you're cooking, and we all know that. These are the real tastes of fall for us because they have that very warm kind of flavor to them. If you can use it fresh or dry in cooking, if you're using it especially dry, you really want to add it early to your cooking. It really needs time to infuse the cooking. So it's not a last minute thing. It's also, these needles can be pretty tough, especially when they're dry. They can be tough. So you want to let it cook down for a pretty good long time before eating it. And usually you don't want to use an entire needle because that's getting kind of big. So you can chop it up, dried. You can have used a mortar and pestle for a long time. That was always part of my job until it became my wife's job. no, excuse me, my daughter's job, where she pulled out little coffee grinder type spice grinder thing and threw the dried leaves in there, and this is what took me grinding. She did in 30 seconds with no effort because she's smarter than me. So they're great, fresh or dry. You drop them in a bottle with vinegars or oil, good olive oil to infuse those things. You can use it to infuse other things to give some really interesting flavors, or already flavored things like fig balsamic vinegar. If you put a little of this in there and let it infuse, it really gives this real complexity to it. I've known people who would put a little bit of a dried stem in bourbon or other whiskey and just let it sit in there, and it would kind of deepen the flavor over time. They really like that. If you get a bunch of kind of nice looking bottles, stoppered bottles, decorative ones, and you're going into holiday season and there's a lot of people surprising you with gifts maybe that you didn't necessarily buy a gift for. You can, you drop a little sprig of this in there and some olive oil in there, a little bow around them. You can have a whole cabinet of them, and, somebody gives you a gift, you can say, oh, here. Or if you go to a party and need a hostess gift and you don't want to bring a bottle of wine or something like that, you can bring that, and, everybody appreciates it. So it's a great way to do that. Now, there's one, I mentioned that the upright ones don't stay upright. One that I got really interested in a while back because of how I like to use rosemary was this one called Barbecue. And it was listed as one that's just straight up. Now, it's 3 feet tall and 6 feet wide in our garden now. But you can see, compared to kind of a normal rosemary, that it really does have these long upright branches. The way I like to use barbecue is kind of as the name suggests, and this was why it was called that, of course, is, I make a little cut on there to make it kind of a sharp point, and I use this as a skewer or just as a flavoring when I'm grilling, and I'll slide the rosemary, I'll poke it right on through, go from the thick end so you're pushing the needles back and not stripping them off in your meat. Do it on, a pork loin. Do it with, you make shish kebabs with it. Anything you do it with really gets this added flavor. I don't use rosemary much with seafood, and that's just a personal taste. Other people may like that. And I don't use it much with beef, really. But pork, lamb, chicken, all very good. Turkey. So it's a fun way to use it, and it presents on a plate. Like if you do a big pork loin and you have a couple of these stuck through the center, and you take it out and you're serving people, and it's got kind of the charred rosemary scent as you bring it in on a platter. It looks it looks like you're real fancy, and all you did was stick a stick in it. And that's that's how I like to impress people. Once they think about it, they don't, they're not too impressed. If you make ice cream, I've had really great ice cream with rosemary. One thing I love with rosemary especially is taking sweet things and adding just a little bit of savory. So honey rosemary ice cream, absolutely delicious. We used to make ice cream some when my kids were smaller. We don't really anymore. We used to keep, have a ice cream maker. You keep the metal thing in the freezer, and so you can make ice cream anytime with this pre-frozen thing. What was really cool, I had a friend that we used to camp with, and they had some little ball that you put all the ingredients in, and you make ice cream by shaking it up, and I think it must have had rock salt and ice you put around it, but you threw it around like a ball, and bounced it and shook it, and it would shake it up, and over time, and you'd get soft serve ice cream, we'll say. Didn't make much at a time, but it was fun to do. I said, even if you don't have this barbecue rosemary, if you have, one of these other ones, another great kind of serving idea is take these, and you can either do it full, or for this, I like to strip off the bottom leaves and use them as little like toothpicks. If you're making, you can do it. A couple things that I've had that I like are just little squares of grilled pineapple with this. Again, like I said, I like that sweet and rosemary. Take something really simple and elevates it. I've also had it with figs stuffed with blue cheese or soft goat cheese. They're great with little kind of caprese little toothpicks with one cherry tomato, and you can get those little balls of mozzarella and drizzle a little bit of balsamic over it, and people can pick it up and it's one bite. You want to get the little cherry tomatoes because you want it to be one bite full. So you can do fun things, and think of all kinds of different things. If there's a cheese that you like with it, you could do that. Kind of the sky's the limit. Wings on the grill are really good. Much better than fried wings if you do them on the grill. And you can take just some garlic cloves, however much garlic you like, some rosemary, however much rosemary you like. Kind of mash those up a little bit. You don't have to be real, careful about what you do, but mash them up with some olive oil, salt, and pepper. So simple ingredients. Throw them in a bowl with chicken wings. Let them marinate for 30 minutes or so in the fridge. Take them out and put them on the grill. Here's the secret to grilling chicken wings, though. Skin on chicken wings, not that, you're already eating chicken. You don't need to make it healthier by taking off the skin. Is if you have a grill that you can adjust to different temperatures depending on side, you do want it kind of a pretty hot, medium high heat. And you start your wings there. Don't mess with them a lot. Flip them once. All grills are different, so I'm not going to give you a time, but you get it until and with the grill open, and you get till the skin starts to get crispy, just starts all over it, and then you move it down to a medium grill, and that helps cook it all the way through, but also crisps up the skin without burning it. I also like rosemary. I mentioned it with bourbon. Great if you like a whiskey sour or any kind of sour drink. Rosemary is great as just a little accent in there. And pretty much across the board, it's great with citrus, especially lemon. It really is a good combination. Lemon, rosemary, chicken, fantastic. A little bit in limoncello. If you like limoncello is a lot for me to drink even a shot of it straight. So a little bit of rosemary in there kind of tempers it a little bit, but lemonade, if you want to class up your lemonade a little bit and make it a more adult, non-alcoholic drink, little rosemary in there. You can put rosemary in the lemonade to really infuse it, but then you can also serve with a fresh sprig, stir right in the glass. My wife has said, when I was talking about doing this, said it's good in Bloody Marys. I don't drink Bloody Marys. The vodka's okay. It's the tomato juice I don't like. So that's a good way to use it. So, part of what I love about using rosemary, especially in cooking, is you can do really simple things with rosemary, and it really gives a much more complex type flavor to the dishes. And as it's cooking, it can really scent the house, which is great. So, I hope you'll think about, using it in some different ways, making some sweet and savory, whether that's for dessert or for your, as part of your meal. It's a really neat plant and a lot of fun. I didn't mention propagation. Let me mention that real quick. It can be very difficult from seed. You can root it almost any time of year. You just, take some fairly new growth, not little floppy growth, take your cuttings. It's no rocket science to this. Get it till it's, cut it where it's still it's stiff but not old and woody. So current season's growth. If you're rooting it, you strip off some of the lower leaves. It helps if you use a rooting hormone. You get powders, you get liquids, you get gels. You just dip it in that, and then stick in some sterile. Usually, it's best to use a soilless soil mix. So you don't want to go dig soil out of your garden. That's not going to be any good for it. And you don't want to stick it too deep, because if you stick it really deep in a container, there's more water sits at the bottom and it'll rot. So just stick it deep enough that it'll hold itself upright. If you do it inside, you can, really this is one you can root on a windowsill pretty easily, since they are, they're very tolerant of dry soils. If the top starts to really wilt, and maybe even before, when you root it, if you pinch out that really limp part at the top, often you'll have better luck. But if you don't and it starts to really wilt at the top, cut that off with some sharp scissors. Try not to move your plant much. Just a well-drained mix. Water the soil media really well. Let it drain out so it's not draining any more water, and then stick your plants. Err on the side of letting it go dry. Don't overwater. People always overwater. Since I am lazy and neglectful with plants indoors, what I like to do when I'm rooting plants is, if I'm rooting them in a pot, don't want a real deep pot, but a shallow pot. I do what I said, wet the soil, get it thoroughly soaked, let it drain out, stick your cuttings in there. And you can do a whole, in a 6-inch pot, you can stick a whole bunch of these in there. You just don't want them really touching each other. And then I'll take a plastic bag, take it around there, tie it up, have something in there to keep it. You don't want the bag touching the plants. And then keep an eye, don't put it in full sun, but bright light. And then watch the bag. If you get a lot of moisture in the inside of the bag, you've got too much water in there, you want to open it up and let some of that moisture out. Usually 10 minutes, you can open it up and then close it back. And just do that until it reaches equilibrium. And then you really shouldn't need to water it again. You can let it go, and you'll kind of have this, it'll stay moist in there. With rosemary, since it is a more dryland plant, you may want to open it up, once a week or so, let it get a little bit drier, water it again, and go through that. I probably wouldn't do that. The other thing is you can do what's called a nearing box. And I just learned 3 minutes before we went live that is named for Guy Nearing, who had the incredible idea of making a wood box and filling it with soil to root plants. I don't know how that managed to get named after him, but hey, there you go. So the nearing box, how I learned it from a great gardener, a woman who was a great gardener, is you just take your cuttings, and rosemary is very easy to root. Rooting hormone or not, and you have a little box with good sterile soilless media in there. You really you wet it down, and you just stick your cuttings in there, and you put it somewhere that gets some shade, and where you can pay attention to it. If it looks like it's getting dry, you can add a little bit of water. She had it out her front stoop, right beside the house. There were foundation shrubs, and she had it kind of behind there. You want it in shade. You don't want it in a lot of sun, because these little guys won't tolerate that. And she would stick cuttings all through the year, kind of pay attention to when different things rooted. Some things rooted better in spring, some in summer, some anytime. So, I don't know if there are questions. You can ask questions in the chat. You can unmute yourself and ask them out loud, and I'll do my best to answer them.
So we had a lot of people sharing their favorite things with rosemary on the list, and one that came up at least a couple of times that people seem to like was rosemary with parsnips and carrots. You didn't mention that one.
I did not, but I love that. I had never had parsnips until very recently. I think that's more of a northern thing. Speaking of northern foods, I've still never had strawberry and rhubarb pie. So if anybody ever does that, fresh strawberry and rhubarb pie, bring me a slice, because I've never had that and I want to try it. But yeah, I love parsnips and carrots. I've gotten really into that, and we do use rosemary with that as well. I like to get, the purple carrots and orange carrots and white carrots and the parsnips, and that's good.
And I've taken care of a lot of the questions have already happened, but someone did ask for some information on how to grow rosemary in a container.
How to grow rosemary in a container.
Yep.
Great question. And I'm sorry I skipped over that. So the yin and yang of growing rosemary in a container is you lose some hardiness when you grow things in a container, because roots can freeze if it gets very cold. So you want to look for hardier forms, some of the ones that are purported to be hardier. I haven't grown them side by side with a lot of them. Tuscan Blue and Gorizia are both kind of often touted as hardier forms. I found the prostrate ones very hardy. Sometimes you see it as prostrata, sometimes you see it as variety prostrata or prostratus group. Irene is a named form, probably all the same thing. And great in big containers, kind of cascading over with something else in it. But, drainage and overwatering are an issue with rosemary. So if you're growing it in a container, best in like a terracotta or ceramic container, because those don't stay as wet as, plastic and resin and all these lightweight things. It's okay if they are, but you definitely want to make sure it has drainage in there, and probably a good idea to lift it off the ground and have it sitting on feet, not directly on the ground, because that can stop drainage pretty easily in a container. You don't need to put rocks or anything else in the bottom as long as you have a good soil. Although if you're growing something in a container and you're going to have it in there for a long, long time, if that's your plan, like a large decorative container that you're not going to switch out on a yearly basis. Really helpful if you take your soil, your soilless mix, and mix it with, you can do gravel, but even better is an expanded slate product. Like we use Permatil here. You mix that with your product, and if you do it in 30% Permatil or 50% Permatil, you increase drainage, but you also increase some water holding capacity, and your soil, since it's much less organic matter, doesn't settle. So if you have a plant in a container for a long time, the particles in your mix, bark and things like that, break down, and so it kind of settles. The soil gets finer and finer as it breaks down, and it becomes more and more subject to waterlogging. Plus, you start going down, having this rim in there, and if you try and fill that with soil, you'll kill your plants. So you have to take them out and repot them and everything. So basically, what you're doing if you're adding Permatil or even just fine gravel, is you're making it more like a rooftop mix that's specially designed to not compact and not be as heavy if you use an expanded slate product like Permatil.
A couple people have asked about pruning rosemary, including the timing, and is it even okay right now to do it? So I thought it could be good to refresh that. So
the main thing that I mentioned is you don't want to prune back beyond the bare branches. You want to always have leaves. So hold on. Let me. So, this is growing on your plant, and there's no leaves all the way down there. As you're pruning it, you wouldn't want to go any farther back than right here where you've still got a green bit. You'd want to leave at least that, because it'll continue to grow here and put out more growth. If you prune farther back, it can put out new growth, but it's much less likely to. As for timing, you can really do it at most any time. If you're in a real a spot where it's real iffy with winter hardiness, I'd maybe wait until getting into spring and it's going to start growing again. If you do it going into fall, and pruning stimulates growth, so you prune and it stays warm, it can push out new growth, and that can get hit by the cold. Not a terribly big deal. I don't prune right now because, like I said, here we often get flowers in December and January. In some cases, that's really peak flowering for many of them for us. And so, beautiful blue flowers on an evergreen shrub on a cold January day is pretty awesome. So I usually prune going into spring if I was going to pick one time. But the truth is, I'll prune anytime on a rosemary if I want.
Okay, our next person is wondering how can she plant a rosemary in clay. She's just wondering if she, of course, digs a hole for the rosemary in the clay, how much of it should she remove, or how can she amend it to improve it for the rosemary?
Planting in clay. First thing, you amend beds, not holes. So if you have a new space that you are going to plant this, get in a soil amendment. You can use pine bark. You can use permatil or expanded slate. You can use compost. Really anything that'll help with soil drainage. Don't use sand. Sand and clay is concrete. So don't use that. You have to use way more sand than the clay that's there for it to actually be good. Now, if you can't do that, if you have an established bed and you don't want to dig everything out and amend the whole bed, you are better planting your rosemary in the clay and not amending the hole at all. What I would do is plant your rosemary up high, get it an inch or so high, so it's kind of mounded up to it, but in that native soil. And that's going to be your best bet on it in terms of dealing with it. You can build soil on top of existing clay, and basically make like a raised bed. You don't have to put square boards on there like you would for a raised bed garden. You can take some beautiful stones or something like that and kind of make a border and mound up with a well-drained mix, and that really works well. Or like the other question, you could grow it in a container.
Great. And another question Donna was wondering about, how can you take care of mites on rosemary?
How can you take care of mites on rosemary? And that is something that can happen with rosemary. If you see little white dots kind of stippling, the leaves just don't look as good. That is sometimes mites. It's not always, but sometimes. And to check for sure, you want to take the plant where you think you have it affected, tap it some more vigorously than that. Tap it pretty hard where you see the stippling, and then up beyond that, and then take your paper. And I'm getting old, so I have to take off my glasses and look around and look for little black dots that are moving around. If you can see little spiders moving around, mites are related to spiders. If you can see things that look like little spiders, it's probably not mites. Mites are tiny. So if you see things that if otherwise you would think was a little spider, it's a little spider. So you really are looking for little black, like ground pepper moving around. That's mites. So the first thing is always check for mites. Always check to make sure that's really what you have, because there are other sucking insects that can mimic that. Mites proliferate where it is hot and dry. Your rosemary likes it hot and dry. So that's the thing. So what I would recommend you do if you do have mites on your rosemary is to get a high pressure nozzle on a hose and just blast it out. Just blast all the foliage really, though. You'll be knocking some leaves out. You want to get it as hard as you can, and you just want to and do it from all different angles, so you can really get it well, and that will greatly reduce the population in there. And, it takes a lot of mites to really do much damage, especially on something that's as tough as rosemary. I don't spray for insects in my home garden. We really don't here at the Arboretum either. I don't like sprays. They're gross. I like rosemary for eating. And so I'm certainly not spraying something that's going to kill things on it if I eat it. There are some organic products. Keep in mind, organic does not mean safe. There are lots of very, very, very toxic organic products. So organic does not equal safe. If you want to spray something that's going to just, knock everything dead, talk to a garden center that has a great big shelf of all kinds of nasty chemicals, because I don't know.
For mites, the garden hose is definitely a good idea.
Yeah.
It's often in the dry summers when it hasn't rained in a while when spider mites come.
Yeah, the spider mites can really proliferate quickly if it's a really dry summer. So, and you don't want to overwater your rosemary. So the blasting with the hose and, for a mite, if you blast it out of that plant, it's like hiking the Himalayas on their knees to get back. You won't get them all. And if it stays hot and dry for a long time, you might need to blast it again after a while. But, then we get into winter, and it gets, around here at least, it gets damp enough and cool enough that they kind of slow down.
Yeah.
I don't consider it a big problem on rosemary personally.
So Mitzi commented that it is good for bean beetles, as you mentioned earlier, but she also added cabbage moths, and I had not heard that one.
Yeah, so you put it in dry sprigs in your closet to keep moths away, like mothballs. But yeah, fresh, live, growing in the garden is exactly the same for moths. So, moths and butterflies pretty closely related. So, don't plant it around your your butterfly weed, your fennel, and other Apiaceae that you're growing for your swallowtails and your monarchs and things like that. Because it won't hurt them. It'll just repel them a bit.
Okay, here's the last one. It's from Patricia, and I'm not too sure if the two things are connected. So maybe she'll need to chime in on this one. She says that her rosemary developed some galls this summer, and does she need to amend the soil? I don't know how those might be. My guess is those related.
Are unrelated. Yeah. So if your rosemary is growing just fine, no, don't amend your soil. If it's growing just fine other than the galls. Most likely the galls are insect related. Galls are often plant's response to insect injury or eggs being laid on it. It's a way to kind of encapsulate it and prevent it from damaging more of the plant. If the galls are unsightly, I'd prune them off. If it looks like they're making the plant really go downhill, maybe send them off to your extension agent to identify them, because I'm not really familiar with what would be causing that. But I don't think I wouldn't consider it a big problem. And I would also say, if you have an old rosemary that's getting big, or you have one that's not doing well and you think it would be better in another spot, you can propagate it, and that's great. It's fun to propagate plants, but rosemary's cheap. You can usually go to a garden center and go down the herb aisle and get it for $3.99. Right now, it's probably being sold at your local grocery store, trimmed like a little Christmas tree. If you get one of those little rosemary Christmas trees, they are trimmed that way. It will not stay that way without a lot of work on your part.
But apparently ask your friend to buy it for you,
ask
right?
a friend to buy it for you, yes, exactly. You don't want the bad luck of buying it yourself. But if you're not superstitious or you like to tempt fate, then buy it for yourself.
So Patricia did come in. She said that she thought galls came from bad soil.
You can get like root
diseases,
galls
yeah.
from nematodes
Yeah.
and things like that.
But she's probably not seeing root galls.
Right.
Is my
So
guess.
they
We
would
need to dig it up.
almost certainly be unrelated, the galls in the soil. Although I suppose there could be some correlation.
Well, between everything that you said today and all the wonderful things that people are mentioning in the chat, I'm looking forward to dinner, which I don't think is going to have any rosemary, but we might need to change that.
Yeah.
So, looking forward to Thanksgiving dinner already.
Mhm.
Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you so much for everyone for joining us today. It was a pleasure having you all here online, and definitely a pleasure having Mark over here talking to us about rosemary today. Thank you so much, Mark, and thank you, Alexander, for the great job at recording us today. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
And we'll see you next week right here at the same place on Wednesday at 3 o'clock. Have a good week.